Greetings all. Welcome back to another episode of the Coptimizer podcast. I say this every time, saying it again. Another fantastic guest, Kristin Stapleton. She is the owner of Amplify3x, and she is a coach, a consultant, and just an all-around great person. Thanks for being here today.
Oh, thank you, Pat. Great to be here. I appreciate the invite.
Well, I'm glad I finally tracked you down and drug you onto the show. We're going to talk about several things today, but just a little bit of background. Kristin and I met years ago, both live in the Greater Lafayette community here, and we were talking about coaching. And I know in the last few years, this concept of coaching has really started to evolve and really start to become more prevalent in the law enforcement space. But I'd like to think that Kristin was a bit of a pioneer, and I still really appreciate her reaching out and thinking about us cops when she was trying to help people. So with that, maybe you can kick it off by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you've been up to, and then we'll get into what drove you to work with cops in the first place and what we learned from that.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. That's a great setup, I think.
That's a big setup. You can take it anywhere you want to go.
Yeah. Well, okay, so you talk about coaching and performance coaching, and it really was your you kind of jogged my memory really as we talked about, where this kind of excitement around coaching comes from, for me anyway. And it's interesting because I think if I look back, it really started at a really young age. And as I've gone forward and coached many leaders, I recognize that most people's, passion and purpose in the world started with a foundation at an early age. So for me, I look back, and one of the things that I had the opportunity to do very early in my life was I was able to play on a team of the best. And in that space, when we talk about the topic, in that space, it was basketball. Okay. So we're talking about, we were a 15 and under AAU team, and we were the best in the country. It probably even more now. I get chills thinking about it. It had such an impact on how I view the world, how I view performance, how I connect with others. To be able to play with the best is an opportunity that, is just tremendous for anyone. And when I say that, you think about what the best means. It was, our starting five were all Division I recruits. Our leader was Stephanie White, who was Indiana Miss Basketball, went on to play for Purdue, went on to play in the WNBA. Yeah.
That's my little boiler up there. Sorry.
Well, I'll let you say
no sorry there. That's pride.
Not my side, but that's all right. We had another great teammate that played for Notre Dame, went on to coach at Northwestern. Another one that played at Penn State. So the talent was there. Now, what was fun about it was, we were a team of 10. I was probably sitting at number 8 out of 10, which can be definitely uncomfortable. But the thing about that team was really about, we all understood our role. Okay. So for example, I was brought on that team, and the only thing that I was really there for was to shut down Stephanie White in practice. So she certainly made me look silly at times, but I learned, the value of hard work and effort and really understanding your role on a team. And I think about that team, and I think about the leaders on that team, and something that they did that really made a difference was they instilled in us, what role we played in the greater mission of that organization. there's so many stories about that. But even though I was number 8, it was always, you understood what role you played and you were expected to play that role to your greatest ability. So effort and attitude was rewarded even more so than performance. We think of those as leading indicators of performance. And, that was seen and felt by the leaders, by the team members, and it was reinforced in the actions that those leaders took. So, I think from an early age, that experience just showed me that you can have the best on the team, but it's really how those individuals interact with one another and the respect that they have for one another that determines really what their performance can be. We had the opportunity, we excelled greatly. We won the national championship in Ogden, Utah. We had several 2-time AAU All-Americans. We went on to continue our national run in several different cities. So it was really about the environment. The reason that performance worked was because of the environment. I certainly wasn't a Division I athlete, but that didn't diminish my role. And so I think that's where my interest in performance started, even though I maybe didn't know that until much later. But really, Pat, that's kind of what I do now is when I'm going into organizations, those are the kind of qualities that I'm looking for in terms of cultivating high performance. Do individuals on the team understand their role in the mission of the organization? And are they held accountable to that? Do they understand it? Is it meaningful to them? And then are they held accountable to that? So, that's really kind of how it all started.
Well, I'll give you a quick Stephanie White story because she wound up winning the national championship with Purdue, right?
Yep.
So that was the first time as a young patrol officer, I got the opportunity to work with my SWAT team integrated with our mobile field force in riot control. Now that's probably not the direction you want to go, but that was kind of fun to see that kind of celebration. Now, sadly, it's been maybe just a little bit too long since we've had the opportunity to celebrate like that again. I'm hoping this is the year, but I digress.
Wouldn't that be fantastic?
But in all seriousness, what you're talking about there is role clarification, right? And that's a great point. And that would be maybe interesting to talk about, because when we did bring you and your team in to work with our command staff, you made a lot of observations, and I don't want to jump ahead too much, but it was number one, it was fascinating for me as a chief to watch this happen, and to see things, but it also brought a lot of clarification to me as well as in things that in not just our agency, but I think policing in general, where we're falling short and where we're not providing the right type of resources to not just our officers, but our frontline supervisors. And that really makes or breaks any agency. So I learned a ton from it. I know you did. But before we even get to that, so when you work with, well, let me tell you, I'll tell another story that you had told me, and this was something that was interesting. We were looking at police departments around the country are really focusing now on officer wellness. It's a much needed, probably long overdue approach to policing, where you take an individual centric approach to wellness, where everybody's an individual. We work with them as individuals, and we provide the resources to them to help them flourish as individuals. And that hopefully in turn results in better performance on the job, longer, happier, healthier lives, long retirements, but then also, the opportunity to really just, quite frankly, survive the job and not be bitter, angry, and broken, which it happens to a lot of cops. And you told me when you were initially trying to bring some of the wellness initiatives and the data that you had to show the private sector, hey, look, if I can come into your company and I can teach these programs and these skills to your employees, we can cut costs in your healthcare spend, and we can improve productivity and all those other metrics. But you had resistance from leadership in those organizations bringing people in. Am I clear? Is that a good synopsis of kind of how you got started?
Yeah, I would definitely say there was resistance around, how to like enforce these kinds of habits on people. There was a bit of well, that's kind of outside of our scope. So
Okay.
I would say yes, that.
So you flipped it though, which I thought was fascinating. And okay, well, instead of focusing on the employees, let's focus on leadership. Let's give them a taste of what this type of coaching and programming can do, where let them experience the benefit and then see what happens. And how that turned out.
Yeah, I mean, that's been tremendous. I guess personally for me, it has been, again, like when I relate it back to my early experiences, I mean, what I learned early on is that if leaders don't embrace these concepts, so in a law enforcement space, you think of chiefs and sergeants and those that are truly making decisions for the department, if they're not embracing these concepts, and trust me, because I've done it wrong, and you roll it out to the masses will resist even more, because they see it as, and I can't disagree with them, as simply words, like we're quote unquote taking care of you, yet they aren't really seeing the behaviors of their superiors, their leaders in that space. So yeah, I mean, it was certainly a unique opportunity for me that I was fortunate to work with you and several others at your level that said, hey, how about we take care of my direct team first? And through that experience, what was really powerful is that once leaders felt it for themselves personally, because that's the truth of human nature, right? Like, what's in it for me? And so by giving them, the leaders, that, there was more of a openness to what that could do for their organizations.
Maybe just talk about what your focus is when you come in, and maybe not even just with a law enforcement organization, but what would be a high level goal that you have anytime that you're working with a new organization, and what you're bringing to them with performance coaching?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, when I go in, if I could put like cap on what I'm doing, like what the purpose is, it's really about holistic care of your team. Okay. And so what I've found in my experience is it really starts with the people. So when I start an organization, I'm going in and I'm doing listening sessions with really what works out to be about 30% of the population. Depending on if that's the executive team, which is where I start, but then we take it a step further to really begin to understand what stands in the way for people. So it's interesting to me because oftentimes so much comes out from that first experience of just helping people feel heard. That is one thing that stood out to me in law enforcement is, and Pat, you'll have to help me out with some of the history there, but definitely more of a hierarchical management experience where traditionally it's sort of been like, you do what I say you're going to do. and kind of keep your mouth shut and punch forward. And while that we absolutely need that in crisis situations, what I've found in working with teams, both private sector as well as law enforcement, is people really feel they really want to be heard for what their specific needs are. So, when I first start with organizations, it's all about these listening sessions, and I have a process to it. There's a certain kind of question process that I take through, and then it's really about learning what stands in the way for teams. And through that, we uncover a lot of what stands in the way from them going from good to great or toxic to something better. So that's number one. Number two is really identifying if they've got the right people in the right seats. So, talk about role clarification. Again, what I find is most of the time people who hire me, they say, I've got a communication problem. Like, I don't understand. I release these communications and then chaos happens and that message doesn't get down into the trenches. And what I've found is that most often it's not really a communication problem per se, but more of an alignment problem. So what I'm looking for is, does everyone on the team understand their role on this team? And do they understand the mission of the organization? I can't tell you how often, in working with companies, if I asked 30% of them what the mission of the organization is, I might get 10 different answers. And they usually have to. And I'm just going to tell you that the human nature, like, unless you're at the very top, that's not going to motivate the masses. So, to answer your question, it's really about listening first and foremost to what needs are not being met. Number two, do you have the right people in the right seats? And number three, do they understand the mission of this organization? Because if not, then we really that needs to be clarified, because otherwise it's very difficult to have clarity of communication if we're not channeling toward the same goal.
So law enforcement organizations are traditionally built on a paramilitary structure, meaning you have, like you said, you have very specific ranks. You have from the time you get hired, it's probably a little bit, the vernacular is probably a little bit different between agencies, but generally you have what they call a second class patrol officer who is a trainee. When they complete their basic level of training or release from a training program, they become a first class patrol officer after a designated period of time. Then you may have a corporal, detective, those types of positions. Then you get into the sergeant, lieutenant, captain. So it has been, that is the traditional. It's a very linear form of rank. It's not very hierarchical. It's and we know that we've seen in I think probably in the last 25 years a big shift, at least in the private sector, to really flatten out organizations. And I think that's a good thing. It's but it would be interesting to look at this and to see like the answers that you get, not just from one agency, but across a lot. And again, that's difficult to do because I've worked with you, and you remember we did work with Dr. Algie from Purdue as well, doing cultural assessments, where we did this, where we went in and did a very comprehensive 360 evaluation. And that process itself, created a lot of resistance, particularly from your supervisors, right? And I don't know, it's easy to be critical of others, but oftentimes people don't like it when others are critical of them, and it creates a defensive type of posture. But flat organizations, a police officer, when they respond to a call, they are their own leader and they are the supervisor on the scene. So there's a lot of trust and a lot of responsibility that's placed on them. And I think it's really interesting when you talk about mission focus and mission clarity. If we haven't defined that well for them, which I just think across the board, I don't necessarily know that we do a good job on that. And I don't think our communities actually help us in this. And I think we've seen that for the last couple of years, because there's this ever expanding demand on services and expectations for a variety of things that we should be handling, like in terms of mental illness and addiction and homelessness. But then on the other hand, you have to solve homicides and make arrests when robberies occur or home invasions or auto theft. But then you also have to be able to try to negotiate and navigate the waters around, well, what's causing this? And is it a societal issue? Is it a policing issue? Yeah, I think, yeah, mission focus might be something at the national level, or it certainly needs to be done, at the agency level, but helping us all kind of understand what our communities want from us. Step one, what do you want from your police department, and what are your expectations? And that would make it easier for chiefs to help deliver that role and message down to their officers, because we see it all the time. And then when officers are managed by their supervisors, sometimes that can create conflict, because, hey, I've got an idea about what I think I should be doing as a patrol officer, and that is different than what you think I should be doing, from my sergeant or up, and now that creates definitely some interesting scenarios.
Yeah, Pat, if I can just jump in here, one of the things that really stands out and what you just shared is, what do our communities want from us? And, my experience working with yourself and law enforcement agencies is and they feel it, this ever growing divide between communities and the law enforcement agency. And that's not to say that there aren't great things being done between those two things, but this tension, right? Our society of becoming us versus them. And you make a great point of, we got to start somewhere, right? And
Right.
Being the first one to open up and say, you know what, we can do better. And we want to understand that. And you talk about taking lessons taking things from law enforcement and applying it to private sector, taking things from private sector, applying it to law enforcement. This whole idea of being customer obsessed. And so kind of like, that's what where I heard you going is like, what do our communities want from us? Now, what I would say in terms of, what's the mission, or are we mission focused, and do people understand it? I can only offer my outside non-law enforcement observation, and really my draw to want to help law enforcement officers. When I first, I think it was my brother actually who suggested, talking to you and starting to engage in this conversation. And as I started studying law enforcement, it really became personal to me, because, I think about the work that law enforcement officers do. And I didn't open this conversation up with this, but first and foremost, above everything else in all of my life, I'm a mom. And, I think of our law enforcement and safety, and it's incredibly essential to communities, to families, to the broader community, that we have safe environments for our families to live and play and enjoy. And so it is not lost on me that I go to work every day with not a concern in the world. I always tell officers, I'm never going to pretend to know what it's like to live in your shoes. Okay. But what I can do is I can help you make those shoes more comfortable, because the work that you do, it matters to how I live my life. So having safe communities that we live and play and enjoy in, that's at the crux of law enforcement and safety. Okay. And that is something that we all can celebrate, because I think all the time, what if we lived in these worlds where safety isn't a given, where we truly do feel fearful. And I can tell you, and thank you to you and your staffs and the successive staffs that are protecting us from that, so that we can enjoy our lives. So first and foremost, it's about our communities and maintaining safety in our communities. But then you take that a step further, and this is where I think that there's such great opportunity from a local perspective, as well as, take this to a national level. It's really also about economic development. I mean, there isn't a city, a county, an area anywhere that's going to thrive in a non-safe environment. So when I thought about, what can we do to help law enforcement officers, it's absolutely essential that they are taken care of, that we pour into them, because they're the crux of everything. Like, our communities will not survive if we don't take care of those law enforcement officers. So I really do have a deep desire to help, because this divide is not instilling a love for our law enforcement officers, a care of our law enforcement officers, and understanding that the reason that we live an independent life is because of the sacrifices and the work that people like you in your shoes do.
Well, I appreciate that. It's and it oftentimes when those on the outside take an adversarial approach, or maybe they see something controversial that happens in law enforcement, and we see it all the time, right? It's cannon fodder on the evening news. You get it on social media, and that's probably a whole different conversation. But I do think people oftentimes miss the importance of that, what you were just talking about, safe environments, because it is really the number one economic driver for any community. You can't flourish if you don't have safety, bottom line. And you're not going to attract new companies. And as we know, at least in our area, right, these Fortune 500 companies and others that are looking to relocate, we're in a university town. We're in a very good situation here. We have great schools, a high level of safety, but that's something that they investigate and they check. And before they're going to commit their employees to living in this area, they want to know that they're making a good decision. Now, without getting too far off topic, so with all that being said, when you don't have trust and you don't have that transparency, or we don't have good communication about what our goals are, it can create a bit of us versus them mentality. And speaking from inside of a police department, the mentality sometimes can be shields up. And this is where it can be insidious inside of police organizations. And this is why I really encourage leaders to work with people like you to help them really lower the shields. Take a look around and see, and understand why that might be happening, because it might be in times of controversy around the country. Let's just say in the post-Ferguson days or the George Floyd days, and everybody is piling on, shields come up, and now you have a mistrust between your agency and the community. You feel like everybody is attacking you, but then internally, and this is the struggle for any leader, right? Especially the head of an organization, is you're trying to balance the needs of your organization versus with the needs of your community. You're trying to support your agency and your officers, and at the same time, demonstrate to your community that we have your best interest at heart, and we need to work together on this. But then internally, when that, when it just seems like, hey, nobody cares about us, it's all bad. I call that the doom loop, right? We can get stuck in the doom loop, and then we start spiraling down, because now inside of a police organization, it's not just us against the outside. It's the officers, and the admin doesn't understand, or nobody works as hard as us in the patrol. Detectives, they're not working hard, and detectives are, like, man, patrol doesn't understand. My cases don't go away. I've got 50, 60, 70, 80 cases in my queue, and I'm working them all the time. I don't get to just go home and reset every night. I take this with me, and this can breed, and it can really become problematic. And so what happens then? We stop talking. And then even in the patrol division, it can be shift versus shift. Day shifts and night shifts, red shifts and blue shifts. And so at the core of all that, right, is communication, is effective communication and understanding. And this is where I think we struggle. And I think it really, really boils, and this is, we're getting to the core of what I wanted to talk about. Took us a while to get here, but this is exactly what I wanted to talk about. How do we teach people, not just police officers, but we're talking from the police perspective. How do we teach them to communicate, to open up, to be vulnerable, to be in a position where we can, hear and be heard from each other? And I think what I'm really curious about is to really kind of to tap into your observations when you were working with police, not just my agency, but other agencies over the few years, and kind of what you saw there.
What I hear you saying is it's like an us versus them, but then it's an us versus us, kind of can be that, it can feel that way. So, here's what I can offer my observations and where I've had and seen success with this. And really, it's about introducing officers to the science behind it. Everyone wants to know why. Like, why does this work? And maybe even more so than that, what's in it for me? Okay, so one of the first things that and in your group and other groups is, before I ever put officers in situations where they're experiential learning, it's about bringing them into the science of communication and how we receive one another. So something to understand is, like, we're all just human, right? Like, I love this, because what I work to do with officers, or any leader I'm working with, is first let them know that they're a good person, right? Like, and so is the guy to the right of you, and so is the girl to the left of you. But here's the reality: we're human. And humans, from the beginning of time, like, if we just take it back to the hunter-gatherer days, all right, our job was to survive. That was our only job. So we went out into the world, and our job was to scan for threat. That's what we did, because we were going to survive, and we had to provide for our families. So we scanned for threat, scan for threat, scan for threat, scan for threat. Now, our world has evolved a lot since then, right? Like, thankfully, most of us are not needing to protect our physical environment, but the brain has not evolved at the same rate. And so what you have is, you have individuals, all of us, okay? I'm in that boat too, where our physical safety, and different for law enforcement, but maybe our physical safety is connected, but we're still scanning for threat. And look, that's just being human. All right. So understanding that one of our automatic responses to any type of change, any type of feedback, any type of questioning of our ability is going to hit the center of the brain that says, threat. And so just first and foremost, just understand that that's crazy human, and it's okay. And it happened to get us to this point where we can survive. And so one of the first points we start with is like, hey, we're all more alike than we're different. We all have these feelings of fear and protection. That's number one. And then it's really that it's exciting, because then to help bring officers on a journey of things like growth mindset and neuroplasticity. We have way more control over how we think than we've ever known before. So growth mindset, neuroplasticity, appreciative inquiry, the idea of creating your own, reality. And it's been very meaningful for me because I've had that personal experience of that transformation. So helping others come along in that journey, once they experience it, it's something you have forever. So I look at the, most of the people that I choose to work with and have an opportunity to work with are very familiar with the physical benefits of taking care of yourself. And what we do from there is really about mental training and helping folks understand, like, this is sort of next level performance, and being able to, train your mind just like you do your body gives us an advantage in an ever evolving, fast pace of change. So, in terms of helping law enforcement from a communication standpoint, what I've found is it's important to first give them some science behind how the brain works, how they're receiving communication, why they're receiving it that way. And then from there, we begin our process of teaching them new ways of interacting.
Yeah, that's great. There's so much to really discuss just in that. And really what you're talking about is the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system in the way that we respond to that stress. And one of my all-time favorite books in policing, really good. It's Rafe Sagarin wrote a book called Learning from the Octopus, and he's a marine biologist from Stanford. And he wound up working for Department of Homeland Security, helping the government identify like how to best set up systems of security in order to protect the organism as a whole. And without going too far, he has I've discussed this a few times, but he has a very simple analogy in that everything that you need to know about life can be learned in a simple tide pool, just from studying biology and what works, right? And the first thing is protect the organism. That's the number one thing that any species on this planet it's in the DNA, it's imprinted. I must first survive, pass on my genes, and that's my job. And when we don't have those old school threats like we used to, we are still finding them. And I think when you explain this to police officers, especially those that have been working for a little while, they really start to get it. When you can sometimes civilians have a hard time making that leap. And we could go in a lot of different directions with this conversation, but I'll give a quick example. When you take a civilian and you run them through your police citizens academy, and you run them through your use of force simulator, and you present them with shoot, don't shoot scenarios, they're terrible at it. Absolutely horrible. Like they shoot children in schools, they shoot hostages all the time. And then afterwards, like there can be like a really, really powerful emotional response to that. Like, oh my, I failed. I hurt somebody, I injured somebody. And where they were looking at these things as just kind of like, well, from the outside looking in, it looks so easy. I watch this stuff on TV all the time. They shoot the guy in the leg, they do whatever. Wow, it turns out that when I'm under stress or I'm under pressure, I don't act that way, or I'm having we start to experience these things like auditory and visual exclusion, and just that stress response takes over. And cops get that, and that's a great way to expose that same type of stress to a civilian who's not used to that type of stress. and one of the other analogies I give all the time is like, and I was just talking about this yesterday on a different recording. The average police officer, and data suggests now, and I think the number's low, so I'm curious where they got the data, but experiences about 180 traumatic, they're exposed to about 180 traumatic events over the course of their career. And I think it's a lot higher than that. And so now you start talking about stress and trauma and the accumulation of stress and trauma. And then when it's unresolved and not addressed, the biological response is protect the organism. And I think it's a long way of saying what you're saying. As police leaders and supervisors, not only is this training about communication, but it's also about identifying when we're starting to see a breakdown in this process, early warning signs, like when the shields go up. And now we have, fiefdoms starting to occur, and a breakdown in communication that might not necessarily be because there's a lack of communication. It just might be, hey, my physiological defenses are up and I'm not even in a good position to receive messages anymore. So everything that's coming into me now is a threat. And so what do? I start gathering my people around me, and we start communicating about what the threat is. And next thing you know, we're not only are you in the doom loop, but you're pulling the people around you into the doom loop. And if there's not somebody there that has the awareness to reach in and grab you and pull you out, that can be a problem. And I think when you consider this and you think about what these physiological mechanisms are doing, and then you look at officer health and wellness, you start to understand, okay, now I get it. I understand why 60 to 70% of the police population is insulin resistant. I see why they're obese, in some cases morbidly obese. And then you really start to understand that the mental and the physical, they're all interconnected. They're all interrelated. And so improving these communication skills isn't just about really improving performance. It's about opening up opportunities to understand when somebody might even be struggling. And when we understand that, then I think we've got great opportunities to be able to perform better.
Absolutely, Pat. Say it all the time, knowledge is power. So a lot of this, what we're talking about is simply giving law enforcement officers the knowledge of what's going on inside. It's not because they're bad or like they're sick. I never come into any of this thinking, no, it's more about like, if we can give you the knowledge behind the physiological response in the moment, if we can give you the knowledge of the physical aspects of performance, if we can give you the knowledge of how the mental response interacts with those things, now we start to give you control. And the one thing I know and learned much about law enforcement officers is they like control. And so it's sort of this different approach that says, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I'm going to provide you with every aspect of what I know, because my God, I need you to be your very best. Please be your very best, because it matters to our community. It matters to you and your family, right? Like I know so many law enforcement officers and I know their families well. And, we do anything to protect them from that stress response that's it's so difficult on their bodies and long-term. And, you talk about the trauma over time. I'm glad you brought that up. Just had a conversation with actually 2 previous Navy SEAL officers who talked directly about this, Pat, about how when we experience a traumatic event, the one thing that they learned through Navy SEAL training is that it's incredibly important they call it compartmentalize that. And what that means is they don't let it fester. They actually go to a safe place, a quiet place, and they mourn that experience. They actually experience those emotions. They have the emotions go through them rather than resist. Because what we're learning, again, this stuff is new. Like, this is the other part that's really fascinating, is we're learning new things about this all the time. And wouldn't we want our best to have that? And what we're learning is that processing, look, nobody was supposed to see a child die and be okay, right? So it's important that officers, they take the time to really walk through that trauma. And as difficult as it is, that they experience it, they understand the emotions that are happening, and they take the time to move through it. Otherwise, we see a compounding effect that really wreaks havoc on the body.
Yeah, and control it's such a powerful word too. And oftentimes, and particularly now in the day and age of the body camera, where everybody gets an opportunity to from the hindsight and luxury of 2020, evaluate an officer's performance under pressure. And police officers and organizations should be doing that. And I know that they do that, but they really should take a hard look at what they can learn from their own stuff. But oftentimes what you see is when, and again, this is the doom loop, right? Where I give somebody instructions and I expect a response. And when I don't get the expected response, I don't have a backup plan. And so what my backup plan then becomes is say it louder and more forceful.
Yeah,
and
old school. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. And then we just got so that again, we're back into the doom loop. And this is again another area where somebody needs to come grab us and just shock us, right? To give us and Viktor Frankl, right? He talks about this being the stimulus gap, right? In that where we always have the ability to decide how we're going to respond, but it's not, you have to train that into your response. It's not something that is automatic for all people. And again, this is where working with a coach, working with a performance coach can be very beneficial because we can practice these skills, and we can learn how to create that gap and take that moment to think about how we're going to respond next. And then the more you practice, just like anything else, the better you get at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Putting officers in positions where they have a chance to practice in a safe environment is really important, and that's something I learned from your team specifically is, when I first started putting them literally face to face with one another and asking them to identify where does this person where are they tremendous? Where do they absolutely stand up at their best? I want you to tell them a specific example where you observed that they were spot on fantastic. And why? And it was tremendously uncomfortable for them to do that. And the thing of it is we got to get better at being able to do that in safe environments so that when we are out in non-safe environments, we've at least practiced some of that uncomfortability of how to communicate in ways that really connect to the other person. I always teach, listen, people will always approach everything from how does this impact me? And if you can better understand what you're saying, how you're communicating, how that's going to be received on the other side, it doesn't really matter what your message is. All that really matters is how it was received. So putting them in positions where they have an opportunity to practice and get real-time feedback is so critical to helping them feel more comfortable doing that outside of that environment.
Yeah, and that's kind of right there at the core of what we ultimately wanted to get to in this conversation. This is not something that we do, or at least I should say, maybe it's being done. I just haven't seen it done very often. Is actually practice the difficult conversations, put people face to face, and like you said, in a safe environment, and then have them walk through what these interactions are going to look like. And I know one of the things that was really beneficial was you had a script, also a practice script where we used other people's stories and information and to be able to get into a rhythm of how the conversations can go. And then you flip it and say, okay, well, now make it personal, make it about, something that about the other person. Because at the core of everything we do, especially for our frontline supervisors, you have to have difficult conversations with subordinates, and you also have to be open to hear difficult feedback coming back from your subordinates. So the idea really should be, at the end of these things, everybody has a better and higher level of understanding about the situation. Now, discipline can be a little bit different, like discipline conversations and formal discipline can be a little bit different, but hopefully if you're really good at having these conversations and the difficult conversations at the earliest possible time, we can reduce disciplinary issues where we course correct at the earliest possible time instead of crash landing at the end and then trying to put the pieces back together.
Yeah, for sure. Pat, one of the things I've learned in working with teams like yours and others is also like helping people cultivate a growth mindset for everyone. So I think when you talk about having difficult conversations, one of the ways that I teach people to approach these things is we first have to start with an undeniable belief that this person can do better. Like undeniable, right? Because what I see happen often is, oh hell, Johnny fucked that up again, or like he has that response all the time, or he's never going to get there or whatever. And listen, if that's where we start, then this stuff is not for you, because the only way to growth is to have an undeniable belief that people can do better. Does that mean that everyone hits the highest performance? Look, I was number 8 out of 10. No, we don't, right? But the people on that team believe that I could do better. And so that's what it's about, is you have to come into these difficult conversations believing that there is more on the other side for that person to give, and you believe in them. Because whether you're saying the words or not, they will feel that with every ounce of your being. So it starts with like first a belief that I can help this person do better, and that's going to be better for them, and that's going to be better for all of us. And you take them as far as you can take them. I mean, there's plenty of situations where, yeah, you may take them all the way as far as they can go, and that's okay too. But if we come into conversations thinking this guy's worthless, that there's no way they're going to get there, then you probably shouldn't have the conversation.
Yeah, that's a great point. So, and I know we're going right on an hour here, and I could talk about this stuff all day, but I think one of the biggest takeaways from the training that we did with you, and where I think police departments can really benefit from performance coaching in general, is that developing a higher level of understanding about what good interactions can look like and how positive they can be, and how you can share maybe deficits in performance, but do it in a way that we build and not tear. And I think that kind of goes back to the old school mentality. I can go back to like my early days in the military. I had some really good leaders, and then I had some just terrible leaders, right? And and I think the military really pivoted in the 90s, probably even before that, but they do a really good job of preparing leaders for leadership positions and supervisory positions before they ever put them in there. Law enforcement, just because of the way merit rules are set up and the way that the organizational structures have been designed, we're not so good at that. Like, just because somebody is technically or tactically proficient in a job, oftentimes that leads to promotion where they're not necessarily prepared to handle the soft skills and the personal interactions that are a big part of leadership and management. So maybe just a couple high level observations there about why you think this kind of, from your own experiences, why you think law enforcement organizations should invest in this type of training.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a lot different than the private sector, is what I would tell you. We find it often people put into leadership positions because they were good at the job to begin with, right? They were they were good individual contributors. So the next logical step is to promote, and oftentimes that leads into a management role. And like you said, without the training to help people become that, we're really not setting our organizations up for success. I can distinctly remember, this is something that I see happen with law enforcement officers and otherwise, is until an individual truly makes a transition, until they truly understand that their role is now to build other people, it is very difficult for them to communicate differently. Okay, so what we see is there are typically individual contributors that get to that level, and there's a continual push for how they want things done. But it takes this transition period, and I can distinctly remember this for me. I can remember the day I was sitting in my office. I was responsible for 8 other high-performing people, and they were great at their job, but I was the leader. And I remember one of them walking into my office, and she wanted to sit down, and she wanted to bitch about something, and she wanted my attention. And I thought, I got no time for this. I mean, I got all this other stuff I got to do. And Pat, I can't tell you exactly how it happened, but when she walked out, a light bulb went off, and I finally got it. I finally realized that my role on this team, go back to role clarity,
Yep,
is not about me. My role on the team is to make her tremendous. And that's the transition that has to happen.
Wow, that's and I think what we're seeing today in our environment is the old model was, for every opening that we had, there would be 100, 200, 300 candidates waiting for that job, like begging to get in there. So you didn't really have to do anything different. It was rinse and repeat. You break somebody down, and when they're done, when they're washed up, you hire the next person, you bring them in. And now law enforcement as a whole we're really forced to compete with the private sector and other industries for a declining number in the workforce, but then also people that just have a different perspective coming in. And I think this type of training, again, really helps organizations build for the future, investing in the people that they have right now, and then really kind of opening up the possibilities for what new levels of performance you can reach in the future.
Yeah, no, we talk about it. And I think I shared with your team, when you think about performance, like, I'm one individual, right? So I can raise my performance by this much, right? But what happens if I go out and cultivate all other kinds of leaders on my team? Well, all of a sudden, I just took my team's performance, essentially my performance, and skyrocketed it, right? I mean, there's only so much you're going to be able to achieve on your own. And why invest in this? Here's what I have not only felt myself, but helped others experience, is that the kind of fulfillment that you get from building other people, it's not touchable to any other achievement you will ever make in your individual career. It's just not, because it provides a different kind of satisfaction when you see other people do things that they never thought were possible for them. And so what motivates me, what excites me about law enforcement officers considering this kind of training is you're not only increasing the performance of your department, but you're giving people something that they will have forever, that fulfills them beyond just the day-to-day, and they take home to their families as well. You know, people want to feel good about what they do, and this is something that goes far beyond an individual achievement.
Well, I think that's a great cap, or a great end point. Otherwise, if I keep talking and ask another question, we're going to go for another hour. So
yeah.
Awesome. Well, that was really cool. For people that might have an interest in learning more about what you're doing, do you have any place you want to send them, like email, website, anything like that?
Yeah, if they can connect with me on LinkedIn is one of the places I find people. I communicate with people most often, and you can find my contact information there. So it's just Kristin Stapleton. That's Kristin, and Stapleton, Staple, Ton. You can also visit me at Amplify3x.com. Although that site is being rebuilt, but so you'll find what you'll find. But in any event, I'm excited about the opportunities, and look forward to working with more just like you, Pat.
Awesome. Well, thanks for spending some of your valuable time with us today. I apologize for a couple of internet glitches, but we'll try to edit that out, so hopefully people won't even notice. But other than that, keep up the great work. You know, we need all the help that we can get, and we need all the support that we can get. So,
we all?
Yes,
Yeah.
we all do. All right, everyone. Thanks
right.
for being here. And until our next episode, will be 10:42. Log into www.performance-protocol and learn more about how to bring this program to your agency and community.